An equal third, my brother Patrick said, sliding a printed spreadsheet across my dining room table like he was closing a business deal. That's what's fair, Nadine. Dad would want it split evenly between all of us. I stared at that spreadsheet, his spreadsheet, prepared by an accountant, projecting the value of Dad's estate down to the penny, and thought about the 6 years behind me, 6 years of medication schedules and physical therapy appointments, 6 years of a marriage that nearly buckled under the weight of my absence. 6 years where Patrick had visited our father a combined total of maybe 20 times, and my sister Yvette had visited even less, always from the safety of a phone call that ended the second something became inconvenient. Fair, I repeated slowly. You want to talk about fair. Don't make this ugly, Patrick said. We're all his children. The law doesn't care who did more work. No, I said, but I do. I thought about the $94,000 I'd spent from my own savings. I thought about the nights I'd slept in a hospital recliner while my phone sat silent. No calls, no texts, nothing from either of them. I thought about the moment, 4 months earlier, when Dad, confused, exhausted, but still entirely himself in the ways that mattered, had grabbed my hand and said, Nadine, I know what they're going to try to do when I'm gone. I already took care of it. I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but sitting across from Patrick, looking at his spreadsheet of an estate he'd contributed nothing to protect, I was about to find out exactly how right my father had been to prepare for this moment. Backstory, setup. My name is Nadine Okafor. I'm 45 years old, and I work as a physical therapist at a rehabilitation clinic in Charlotte, North Carolina. I've been married to my husband Samuel for 18 years, and we have 2 children, Chidi, 16, and Adeze, 12, both of whom grew up, in many ways, alongside my father's slow decline, absorbing far more of its weight than any teenager or preteen should have to. My father, Emeka Okafor, was 73 when the first real signs of trouble appeared. My mother, Ngozi, had passed away in 2018 from complications following a heart attack, and after that, Dad lived alone in the house I grew up in, about 20 minutes from mine. A proud, formerly vigorous man who had immigrated from Nigeria in the 1970s, built a successful accounting practice from nothing, and never once, in his entire life, asked anyone for help with anything. Which made it especially difficult when, in 2019, that same fierce independence started slipping. I have 2 siblings. Patrick, 48, works as a regional sales director and lives about 90 minutes away in Raleigh. Yvette, 39, is a corporate attorney, a detail that matters considerably for what happened later, living in Atlanta, roughly 5 hours away. The first signs were subtle. Dad forgetting appointments he'd scheduled himself. Dad calling me, confused, asking where a set of keys were that were sitting in his own hand. By 2020, his primary care physician, Dr. Helena Marsh, referred him to a neurologist after a battery of cognitive screenings raised concerns. And in August of that year, Dr. Adaora Nwosu diagnosed him with early-stage Alzheimer's disease, complicated later by a series of small strokes that accelerated his cognitive decline faster than the Alzheimer's alone likely would have. There was no family meeting where responsibilities were divided. I want to say that clearly, because it matters enormously for everything that followed. What happened instead was gradual, almost imperceptible in real time. I was the one who attended that diagnostic appointment, because Patrick had a critical sales conference that week, and Yvette said, over the phone, I trust you to handle the medical stuff, Nadine. You always know what questions to ask. That single sentence, I trust you to handle it, became, over the following 6 years, the entire architecture of my life. By 2021, I was managing Dad's medications, a growing list that eventually included donepezil for the Alzheimer's, memantine once his decline progressed further, a blood thinner following his second small stroke, an antihypertensive, and eventually medication for the agitation and sundowning that came with more advanced dementia. I organized his pillbox weekly, then daily. I attended every neurology appointment, every follow-up, every medication adjustment, because someone had to translate the clinical language into something Dad, and eventually, only I, could track and understand. By 2022, Dad could no longer safely live entirely alone. I hired a part-time aide, a compassionate woman named Beatrice, to come 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, at $25 an hour, so I could maintain my full-time job while ensuring Dad had supervision. I paid a substantial portion of Beatrice's wages myself, roughly $1,600 a month, because Dad's accounting practice had been sold years earlier, and his remaining assets, while not insignificant, needed careful stewardship, not depletion, and asking Patrick or Yvette to contribute consistently produced vague deflections that never materialized into actual payments. I remember specific moments that crystallized how thoroughly my siblings had disengaged. In March 2022, I texted the family group chat, "Dad's Alzheimer's has progressed enough that Dr. Nwosu recommends we start looking at eventual memory care options. Can we talk about this as a family?" Patrick responded 2 days later, "Sounds tough. Let me know what you decide. I trust your judgment." Yvette didn't respond for a week, and when she did, it was, "I wish I could be more involved. Atlanta is just so far. You're so good with this, Nadine. Honestly, I don't think I could handle it the way you do." "I don't think I could handle it," became Yvette's constant refrain, flattery disguised as an excuse, praise that functioned as permission to remain entirely absent. By 2023, my daily life had reshaped itself almost completely around my father's needs. I reduced my clinic hours from full-time to a 0.7 FTE, costing me approximately $19,000 a year in lost income, plus a promotion to clinic director I'd been on track for, that quietly went to a colleague instead, since I could no longer commit to the hours the role required. I'd wake at 5:30, get my own kids ready for school, work a reduced but still demanding shift, then drive to Dad's house most afternoons to relieve Beatrice, manage his evening medications, timing that mattered enormously, since missing his donepezil dose or delaying his blood thinner could have serious consequences, help him with dinner, sit with him through the confusion and occasional agitation of sundowning, and often not get home until 8 or 9 p.m., exhausted, missing dinner with my own family more nights than I could count. Samuel, to his enormous credit, absorbed far more of the parenting than any husband should reasonably have to shoulder alone, but even he began, gently and then less gently, to voice his own exhaustion. "Nadine," he said once, "in 2023, I feel like I'm raising our kids by myself some weeks. I support what you're doing for your dad, but I need you to see what it's costing us too." I saw it. I just didn't know, at the time, what else to do about it, because every time I raised the subject of shared responsibility with Patrick or Yvette, the conversation dissolved into vague promises that dissolved just as quickly into nothing. By 2024, Dad's condition had progressed to the point where he required nearly round-the-clock supervision, and I made the difficult decision to move him into a specialized memory care facility, Brookstone Manor, at a cost of $6,900 a month, a decision I made almost entirely alone, researching facilities, touring them, comparing state inspection reports, while Patrick offered only, "Whatever you think is best, you've got this handled," and Yvette contributed a single phone call expressing concern about whether he'd feel abandoned, a question that stung considerably, coming from someone who had visited our father perhaps 6 times in the preceding 4 years. Rising conflict. The moment that exposed the true depth of my siblings' absence happened in November 2024, on a Tuesday evening. Brookstone's night staff called me at 9:47 p.m., informing me Dad had experienced a seizure, his first, likely related to the cumulative effects of his strokes and disease progression, and that he'd been transported to the ER. I arrived to find him disoriented, exhausted, hooked up to monitors, while the ER physician explained they were starting him on an anticonvulsant and admitting him for observation and an EEG to assess seizure risk going forward. I texted the family group chat immediately. Dad had a seizure. He's in the ER. They're admitting him. This is serious. Please call me. Patrick responded 4 hours later. That's really scary. I've got a huge presentation Thursday. Is there any way you can keep me posted by text? Hard to get away right now. Yvette called the next morning, her voice tight with something that sounded more like professional irritation than fear. I have a deposition I genuinely cannot move. Nadine, can you handle the immediate stuff and loop me in on any major decisions? Nobody came. Not that day. Not through the entire 3-day admission. I sat in that hospital alone, sleeping in intervals in a recliner chair, missing work, coordinating with the neurology team about anticonvulsant dosing, translating medical information for Dad when his confusion made him frightened, advocating when I felt his agitation wasn't being adequately managed overnight. When Dad was finally discharged back to Brookstone, requiring an adjusted care plan and closer monitoring for further seizure activity, I called Patrick directly, exhausted past any remaining patience. I need actual help, I said, not text updates after the fact. I need one of you to take on some piece of this, or at minimum, help cover some of these costs. I am completely alone in this, Patrick, and I cannot keep doing it by myself. There was a long pause, and then Patrick said something I will never fully forget. Nadine, look, nobody forced you into this role. You've always been the one who steps up, who needs to be needed. I'm not going to feel guilty because you chose to make Dad's care your whole life. I didn't choose it, I said, my voice breaking. I did it because neither of you were there, and somebody had to be. That's not fair to say, he replied. You don't get to guilt trip us for having our own careers and families, Nadine. You have no right to complain about something you clearly wanted to control. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage after that call, gripping the steering wheel, feeling something crack open that had been holding steady for nearly 4 years. By that point, I calculated, because I'd started keeping meticulous records, a habit born from years of clinical documentation in my own profession, that I had spent just over $71,000 of my own money across Beatrice's wages, medical copays, home modifications before the move to Brookstone, and a portion of the memory care costs that Dad's remaining savings couldn't fully cover alone. Patrick and Yvette's combined financial contribution over 4 years, exactly $0. Their combined hours of direct caregiving, I genuinely could not calculate a meaningful number, because there was so little to measure. And yet, whenever I mentioned needing help, the response circled back, unfailingly, to the same accusation, that I had wanted this, that I had chosen it, and therefore had no standing to complain about what it had cost me. Climax-Betrayal Reveal. Dad's health continued its slow, difficult decline through 2025, and by the following spring, Dr. Nwosu was gently raising the subject of hospice-appropriate palliative care planning, given the progression of his disease, combined with his cardiovascular risk factors. It was around this time, as conversations about Dad's remaining time and his estate's eventual distribution began circulating, that Patrick and Yvette's interest shifted dramatically, not toward increased involvement in his care, but toward the assets he would eventually leave behind. Patrick called me in April 2025 and after minimal preamble, got directly to his point. I think we need to have a real conversation about the estate, he said. Dad's house is worth close to $280,000 now, plus what's left of his savings and his old retirement accounts. I had my accountant put together a projection. We should talk about making sure everything's split fairly between the three of us. I felt something go cold in my chest. Patrick, I've spent over $71,000 of my own money on Dad's care. I've reduced my work hours for 4 years. I'm not sure equal is the right word for what's fair at this point. He's my father too, Patrick said, an edge entering his voice. I'm entitled to a third, legally, regardless of who handled the day-to-day. That's just how estates work, Nadine. Don't make this personal. Then Yvette, using her legal background like a blade, added her own version during a separate call that same week. Look, Nadine, I understand you've done a lot, and I'm grateful, genuinely. But from a legal standpoint, absent a will that says otherwise, intestate succession, or even most standard wills, split things evenly among children. Your contributions, while significant, don't automatically translate into a larger legal share. Dad has a will, I said. You know that. We'd want to review it, Yvette said, her tone shifting into something more clinical, more careful. Just to make sure everything was executed properly, that Dad had full capacity when any changes were made, given his cognitive decline. I sat with that sentence for a long moment before its full implication landed. Are you suggesting Dad wasn't competent when he made decisions about his own will? I'm saying we need to make sure everything holds up to scrutiny, Yvette said, especially given how much control you've had over his finances and his day-to-day life. It would be irresponsible of us not to ask these questions. 3 weeks later, that suggestion became something far more direct. Patrick and Yvette, through an attorney Yvette had arranged, sent a formal letter raising concerns regarding potential undue influence in Dad's most recent estate planning documents, citing my role as his primary caregiver, financial power of attorney, and daily decision-maker as creating what they called an inherent risk of improper influence that warranted independent legal review before any distribution could proceed. I read that letter at my kitchen table, my hands trembling with a fury I had rarely felt in my entire life. They were accusing me, implicitly, but unmistakably, of manipulating a man with advancing dementia for financial gain. Me, the one who had spent 6 years of my life, over $71,000 of my own money, sacrificed a promotion, strained my marriage, missed countless evenings with my own children, sat alone through a seizure and a hospital admission while my siblings cited work conflicts, and now, the moment real assets entered the conversation, was being treated as a suspect rather than the daughter who had shown up every single day. You have no right to question this, I told Patrick, my voice shaking. I have every receipt. I have every appointment record. I have documented proof of everything, Patrick. That's exactly what someone would say either way, he replied, and something in that casual dismissal broke something inside me that had been holding on by threads for years. Turn twist. I want to tell you I fell apart entirely. I did, for about a day. And then something in me went quiet and sharp, the way it does in clinical practice when a patient's condition suddenly demands absolute focus and no room for panic. I hired an elder law and estate attorney, a measured, formidable woman named Attorney Wendy Okonjo, and brought her everything. Every receipt from Beatrice's wages across 4 years, totaling over $58,000, every medical copay statement, every text message showing me relaying updates faithfully to Patrick and Yvette, alongside their consistent pattern of minimal engagement and vague deflection. Bank statements demonstrating money flowing exclusively from my own accounts into Dad's care expenses, never once in the reverse direction, never a single unexplained withdrawal that could suggest anything resembling the undue influence they'd alleged. And critically, I had something Patrick and Yvette didn't know existed. In 2022, shortly after Dad's diagnosis progressed to a point where his capacity might eventually be questioned, Dad had insisted, entirely his own idea, at his own request, on meeting with an estate attorney to formalize his wishes while he still clearly retained decision-making capacity. Dr. Nwosu had conducted and documented a formal cognitive capacity assessment that same week, confirming unambiguously that Emeka Okafor understood the nature and consequences of the estate planning decisions he was making. In that 2022 meeting, Dad had updated his will, allocating 65% of his estate to me, in recognition of the sustained care, sacrifice, and daily presence provided by my daughter Nadine, without which my quality of life in these final years would have been substantially diminished, with the remaining 35% split between Patrick and Yvette. He had also executed a durable financial power of attorney, naming me as sole agent, with the same capacity assessment attached as supporting documentation. When Attorney Okonjo sent this documentation to Patrick and Yvette's attorney, the capacity evaluation, The 4 years of financial records showing money flowing only from me to Dad, the caregiving log, and the properly executed, professionally witnessed estate documents, their undue influence claim, collapsed almost immediately. There was, quite simply, no legal foundation left to stand on. But the moment that actually ended the dispute wasn't a legal filing, it was Dad himself. Attorney Okonjo arranged a mediated family meeting, hoping to avoid years of costly, painful litigation, and Dad, though his speech had grown slower and his memory more fragmented, insisted on attending. When Yvette, in that meeting, tried once more to suggest that fairness meant an equal conversation at minimum, Dad lifted his head, looked directly at her, and said, with more clarity than I'd heard from him in months, "Equal. You want equal." The room went still. Nadine sat with me through every bad night. You two sent texts. I remember more than you think I do, even now. I made my decision when I could still think clearly, and I meant every word of it. Yvette started to respond, but Dad wasn't finished. "I heard what you said about my capacity. I was there for that meeting. I signed that paper because it was true, not because anyone told me what to think. Don't you dare pretend otherwise." Resolution: Patrick and Yvette's attorney formally withdrew the challenge within 2 weeks, facing a capacity evaluation, 4 years of financial documentation, and Dad's own unambiguous witness testimony that left no room for further argument. There was no prolonged court battle, no drawn-out hearing, just an assembled record so clear that continuing to fight it would have meant fighting the truth itself. Dad passed away in September 2025, 6 years after his diagnosis, peacefully, at Brookstone Manor, with me by his side. Patrick arrived an hour after he'd already gone. Yvette didn't make it at all, delayed by a flight she'd booked too late. The estate settled exactly as Dad had arranged it in 2022. 65% to me, 35% split between my siblings. Neither contested it further, though our relationships remain strained in ways I suspect will take years, if ever, to fully mend. Yvette called me a few months later, her voice quieter than the confident attorney tone I'd grown used to over the preceding months. "I think I told myself the legal angle was about fairness, because it was easier than admitting how absent I'd actually been," she said. "I'm sorry, Nadine. I know that's not enough. I appreciated the honesty, even arriving as late as it did. When I think about everything now, the $71,000 spent from my own pocket, the stalled career, the strained marriage that somehow survived, the 6 years of missed family dinners and reduced sleep, and a seizure I faced entirely alone while my siblings cited work conflicts, I don't think about the outcome in terms of triumph. I think about how easily, how quickly, 6 years of quiet, unglamorous devotion could have been erased by 2 people who showed up only once there was something to divide. Caregiving doesn't come with an invoice anyone reads in real time. It comes with 2 a.m. hospital calls, medication schedules memorized out of necessity, and a career quietly set aside while everyone else's life continues, uninterrupted, an hour or 5 hours away. It's invisible labor, right up until there's an estate to discuss, and then, suddenly, everyone remembers they were family all along. If you are the one holding that responsibility, keep every record, every receipt, every note, not because you expect to need it in court, though you might, but because someday, the truth of what you gave deserves to exist somewhere solid, undeniable, safe from anyone who arrives late and tries to claim an equal share of something they never helped carry. My father made sure of that for me. I hope, if you're in this fight right now, someone does the same for you.